What's something you wish your family would just admit already?
You know that moment when you've been holding it in for years, smiling through the nothing, and then one little post flips the whole darn table, pulling you into a whirlwind of long-buried resentments and unexpected confrontations that make you question every family tie you've ever trusted. That's exactly where I found myself on my 42nd birthday, staring at a for sale sign for a beach house I'd never imagined affording in my wildest dreams of escape from the suburban routine that had defined my life since the divorce. Thinking to myself that if my family couldn't muster even a simple acknowledgement after 5 straight years of forgetting the day I entered this world amid their endless distractions and self-absorbed dramas, then maybe it was high time I claimed a space entirely for myself, one where boundaries weren't just suggested, but enforced like the unyielding crash of waves against the shore. I remember the drive down that empty highway from Chicago toward the Michigan lakeside, stretching out endlessly under a sky heavy with the promise of autumn change, the radio droning on with those classic rock ballads about independence and lost connections that mirrored the quiet ache I'd carried for half a decade now. Ever since the pattern of neglect began right after my marriage to Mark crumbled under the weight of unmet expectations and long work hours, leaving me in that cramped apartment where I expected at least a phone call from mom or dad to offer some comfort. During the transition, yet nothing arrived, not even a belated message, as they immersed themselves in the social whirl of their Florida retirement community. While my sister Lisa juggled her chaotic parade of unreliable partners that kept her perpetually occupied, and my brother Tom buried himself in his demanding sales career up in Seattle, his young children demanding every spare moment of his attention without room for the sister who'd always played the role of reliable supporter in the background. The second year unfolded much the same way, with me organizing a modest gathering for myself alongside a handful of colleagues from the marketing firm where I consulted on branding strategies that ironically involved crafting images of perfect family bliss for clients who paid top dollar, lighting a solitary candle on a generic bakery cake while idly scrolling through social media feeds that highlighted Lisa's exuberant announcement of yet another career milestone as if it were the pinnacle of human achievement, all without a whisper of recognition for my own milestone slipping past unnoticed. And even when Mom finally reached out 2 days after the fact with a cursory happy belated sentiment delivered through a group text that lacked any personal warmth, feeling as impersonal as a mass-marketed holiday card soaked in indifference, I chose not to voice my disappointment, instead forcing a smile in my reply and carrying on as the unflappable one who'd learned early on that complaining only invited more excuses wrapped in faux concern. By the 3rd year, this oversight had woven itself into the fabric of our interactions like an persistent undercurrent pulling at the edges of what remained of our sibling bonds. When Dad accidentally forwarded a generous check intended for my niece's celebration directly to me instead, laughing it off over the phone as a harmless clerical error born from his increasingly scattered organizational habits in retirement, while Lisa followed up a full week later with nothing more than a single heart emoji tossed into the chat as if that token gesture could bridge the growing chasm of emotional distance, leaving me to spend the evening alone in my home office surrounded by spreadsheets and campaign mock-ups, treating myself to an extra espresso run that served as a poor substitute for the connection I craved but had long since stopped pursuing outright. The 4th year arrived amid one of those brutal Midwestern winter storms that blanketed everything in ice and isolation, the power flickering out just as the clock struck midnight on my special day, my phone remaining stubbornly silent without so much as a buzz from the family members who'd positioned themselves as the center of every holiday gathering, and in that moment curled up on the couch under layers of blankets. I couldn't help but envision them all clustered around Tom's barbecue grill down south, sharing stories and laughter without a passing thought for the daughter and sister who'd spent years quietly bailing out Lisa's financial scrapes or discreetly supplementing Dad's pension shortfalls whenever his golf outings exceeded the budget. Yet here I sat forgotten once more, washing down the sting with sips from a bottle of inexpensive red wine that blurred the edges of my resolve just enough to whisper a private vow that the next oversight would prompt me to orchestrate something truly transformative for myself, a bold step toward reclaiming the autonomy they'd inadvertently taught me to value above their inconsistent affections. So when the fifth year dawned on my 42nd birthday with the familiar void of an empty inbox and no festive greetings lighting up my notifications, just the steady hum of my laptop processing another round of client revisions under the fluorescent glow of my makeshift workspace, a targeted real estate advertisement suddenly appeared on my screen featuring this charming beachfront property in Saugatuck. Its weathered shingle exterior and expansive wraparound porch perched above rolling dunes that evoked visions of serene solitude far removed from the tangled obligations of family life, and in a surge of impulsive determination fueled by the cumulative weight of those overlooked celebrations, I delved into the details, methodically reviewing the financials drawn from savings I'd accumulated by foregoing the annual reunions where I often felt like an outsider anyway, submitting an offer through the agent before the lunch hour had even passed, and remarkably, the acceptance came back almost instantaneously, propelling me into the car for an impromptu drive northward, where the keys soon rested solidly in my hand like a talisman of newfound self-reliance. Arriving at the property that very afternoon, I wandered through its creaking wooden floors and threw open the windows to let in the invigorating rush of salty lake air mingled with the faint scent of pine from the nearby woods, experiencing for the first time a profound sense of ownership over a domain untainted by external demands or historical baggage, and as the sun began its descent casting a golden hue across the restless waves visible from the deck, I captured a snapshot of that breathtaking vista with my phone, composing a Facebook post whose words carried the sharp edge of years unspoken, declaring it as my birthday gift to myself following 5 years of navigating solitude without protest, explicitly stating no family allowed since this sanctuary belonged solely to me, and with a deep breath that steadied my racing pulse, I pressed send, observing the initial wave of supportive reactions from distant acquaintances who intuitively grasped the undercurrent of assertion in my declaration, even as a flicker of apprehension stirred within me about the potential tidal wave of responses that might soon disrupt this hard-won peace, leaving the evening air charged with the anticipation of conflicts yet to unfold. The notifications began cascading across my phone screen almost before I could set it down on the weathered wooden deck railing after hitting send on that Facebook post. A steady stream of pings that at first brought a rush of validation from long-lost acquaintances and work contacts who responded with heart emojis and quick messages praising my bold move toward self-care, their words unknowingly tapping into the undercurrent of frustration I'd harbored for years without ever letting it spill over into outright confrontation. But then, slicing through the supportive chatter like a jagged piece of driftwood washed up on the shore, came Lisa's comment that detonated the fragile calm I'd just established in this beach house haven. Her all-caps tirade accusing me of staging some grand act of selfishness by purchasing an entire property solely to broadcast my grievances and make everyone else look bad, as though she hadn't been the one repeatedly leaning on me for emotional and financial lifelines during her string of disastrous relationships without ever pausing to reciprocate on days that truly mattered. Her words laced with that familiar indignation that always positioned her as the perpetual victim in our sibling dynamic. Even when the evidence pointed squarely at patterns of oversight she'd participated in willingly over the past 5 years. I stood there in the fading light of the lakeside sunset, the cool evening breeze carrying the rhythmic murmur of waves that now seemed to echo the building tension in my chest, and instead of typing a heated reply that might escalate things prematurely, I allowed a wry chuckle to escape my lips because Lisa had mastered the art of deflection so thoroughly, reminiscent of that incident 2 years prior when she showed up unannounced to what was supposed to be my quiet self-celebration lunch at a little bistro near the office, commandeering the conversation with exhaustive details about her most recent heartbreak and the fallout from yet another ill-advised move across state lines, only to vanish afterward without contributing a dime to the tab that I covered out of habit, leaving me to nurse not just the bill but the lingering sense of being perpetually sidelined in my own narrative. As I scrolled deeper into the comment thread, fragments of our shared history resurfaced unbidden, sharp and insistent like seashells crunching underfoot on the path to the water, pulling me back to childhood birthdays where the atmosphere shifted palpably after that fateful swing set mishap when I, in a momentary burst of 8-year-old envy over her undivided attention from Mom, gave an inadvertent push that sent her tumbling and resulted in the faint scar tracing her forehead, an event that prompted our parents to lavish extra care on her celebrations thereafter, baking elaborate cakes adorned with her favorite themes while mine received the standard fare of a boxed mix and hurried well wishes, if schedules allowed, a subtle favoritism that extended into adulthood with Dad quietly funneling resources toward Lisa's fleeting artistic pursuits even as he critiqued my steady climb through the corporate ranks as too practical for emotional depth, and Tom, ever the avoider of discord, mirroring their lead by prioritizing group holidays that revolved around her latest crisis, without carving out space for the sister who'd mended so many fences behind the scenes. The influx of comments continued to swell, with a few mutual friends offering gentle support that warmed me momentarily but couldn't erase the sting of Lisa's public outburst, which by now had drawn replies from extended relatives chiming in with neutral platitudes that only amplified the awkwardness, making the whole feed feel like a digital family reunion gone awry. And just as I considered muting the notifications to preserve my evening's peace, my phone vibrated with an incoming call from Mom's number, the Florida prefix a stark reminder of the distance that had grown not just geographically but emotionally between us over these overlooked milestones. I hesitated for a beat, my thumb hovering over the accept button while the waves provided a soothing underscore to the internal debate, then answered on the third ring, bracing for the onslaught that unfolded predictably as she expressed feigned surprise and concern over my post, her tone dripping with that maternal mix of hurt and manipulation that suggested my declaration had wounded the family unit more than any actual neglect ever had, weaving in tales of her packed calendar filled with community events and Dad's health checkups as justifications for the lapses, her voice quivering just enough at the edges to plant seeds of doubt about whether I was blowing things out of proportion, yet slipping in that classic line about blood being thicker than water and how we all needed to rally through life's ups and downs, a sentiment that rang hollow given the absence of such rallying cries during my own pivotal moments like the divorce proceedings or the grueling nights rebuilding my career solo. Keeping my responses measured and infused with a touch of levity, I quipped back that the beach house's signal strength outshone the connectivity of our last awkward Zoom family catch-up. A light jab that elicited a forced laugh from her but masked the deeper simmer of resentment at the double standards she'd helped perpetuate, and after the call ended with her promise to talk soon that felt as substantive as sea foam, I felt emboldened to channel the moment into something proactive, firing up my laptop on the porch to launch a spontaneous live video tour of the property, panning the camera across the sunlit rooms and the expansive view while narrating with witty asides about establishing a no-excuses sanctuary complete with a strict policy against 11th-hour family obligations, the chat exploding with amused reactions from viewers who appreciated the humor without grasping the full backstory, but nonetheless fueling my sense of clever retribution that poked at their patterns without descending into outright hostility, like finally illuminating the room's corners after years in the shadows. As the broadcast wound down amid a flurry of virtual cheers, my phone lit up once more with a voicemail notification from Dad, his voice gravelly and weighted with an undercurrent of gravity that caught me off guard, alluding to the need for a serious discussion about an incident from our summers long past and how my online declaration was dredging up matters we'd collectively agreed to let settle like silt on the lake bottom, the words trailing off in a way that left me rooted to the spot with the night air turning crisp around me, my mind swirling with questions about which buried fragment of our history he intended to unearth next and what fresh wave of conflict it might bring crashing through the doors of this newfound refuge. Dad's voicemail replayed in my mind like a persistent echo bouncing off the walls of the beach house as I stirred awake the following morning to the soft patter of rain against the roof and the distant rumble of thunder rolling in from the lake. The weight of his words about dredging up that old summer incident clinging to me heavier than the damp sheets I'd twisted in during a restless night filled with fragmented dreams of childhood swings and unresolved apologies, prompting me to reach for my phone first thing to listen again while brewing a pot of strong coffee in the kitchen that overlooked the graying dunes. his gravelly tone laced with a mix of accusation and urgency that made it clear this wasn't just another lecture on family propriety, but something deeper. A deliberate invocation of history meant to counter my bold assertion of independence in that viral post, which had now amassed hundreds of views and shares among our extended network, turning what started as a personal declaration into a public reckoning that forced even the most distant relatives to pick sides in the comment sections. I paced the living room with mug in hand, the scent of fresh grounds mingling with the earthy petrichor seeping through the slightly ajar window, debating whether to call him back immediately or let the tension simmer a bit longer as a subtle form of payback for the years he'd overlooked my birthdays in favor of prioritizing Lisa's endless stream of minor emergencies and Tom's career milestones. But the pull of confrontation proved too strong by midday when work emails tapered off, leading me to dial his number during what I imagined was his afternoon golf slot, the connection clicking through after 2 rings with his voice emerging gruff and immediate, diving straight into a tirade about how my online stunt was humiliating the family name across social platforms where neighbors and old friends from his manufacturing days in Illinois were now whispering judgments, framing me as the ungrateful daughter who'd always harbored a dramatic streak even as a child, conveniently reframing the swing set accident as my deliberate act of jealousy that scarred not just Lisa physically, but the entire household emotionally, glossing over the fact that our parents had responded by elevating her celebrations to near-festive spectacles complete with custom invitations and themed decorations, while mine devolved into hurried afterthoughts squeezed between their work shifts and weekend errands. A pattern of favoritism that Dad now justified as necessary compensation for her lingering insecurities rather than an unfair tilt of the scales that left me perpetually proving my worth through quiet acts of support like covering unexpected vet bills for their aging dog or mediating disputes during holiday visits. As he pressed on with details of the incident, painting me as the instigator whose impulsiveness had set a precedent for unreliability, a memory surfaced unbidden of rummaging through Mom's attic clutter during a reluctant trip home last Christmas to help sort boxes for their downsizing, where I'd unearthed that yellowed letter folded inside a forgotten photo album, her handwriting confessing to a confidant about consciously steering more affection toward Lisa to offset the trauma of my reckless push. A revelation I'd tucked away as parental bias at the time but now crystallized into undeniable proof of the deliberate emotional ledger they'd kept against me, fueling the forgotten birthdays as ongoing subtle retribution rather than innocent lapses amid their busy retiree schedules, and in the midst of Dad's escalating monologue. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Lisa demanding I retract the post or face her driving up from Detroit to hash it out in person, her words dripping with that entitled urgency that ignored how she'd contributed to the silence by commandeering family bandwidth with her latest art gallery flop or boyfriend debacle without ever circling back to acknowledge my quieter struggles. The rain intensified outside, mirroring the storm brewing within as I wrapped up the call with Dad by asserting that my beach house represented earned autonomy, not open season for guilt trips. A measured retort infused with dry humor about how the property's deed listed only my name, unlike the shared resentments we'd all inherited. But the peace shattered by evening when the crunch of tires on the wet gravel driveway signaled Lisa's uninvited arrival, her figure materializing at the door soaked and defiant under the porch light, phone clutched like a weapon as she burst inside without waiting for an invitation, waving screenshots of my live tour and railing against my portrayal of her as the chaotic sibling when in truth she'd only ever sought the support any family would offer. Her accusations laced with barbs about my perceived coldness born from professional success that distanced me from their everyday messes. Dropping casual mentions of Tom's children, inquiring why Aunt Sarah had become such a ghost in their lives lately, all while the scar on her forehead caught the lamplight as a silent emblem of the grudge she nursed deeper than I'd realized. The argument unfolded in the living room amid the cozy flicker of a gas fireplace I'd lit against the chill, her voice rising with claims that my independence masked outright rejection of the bonds that had sustained us through tougher times like Dad's early layoff scares or Mom's health scares, but I stood firm. The hurt from years of imbalance surfacing in waves that surprised us both, and as she pivoted toward the kitchen in a huff, demanding a drink to calm her nerves, I seized the moment to pull up the smart home app on my phone, initiating the remote lock change with a few swift taps that engaged the new deadbolts I'd ordered post-purchase precisely for scenarios like this, the system beeping confirmation just as she turned back and through the reinforced glass. I delivered my witty reprisal by quipping that this upgrade enforced my no-surprises policy on familial drop-ins, documenting the exchange with a quick video snap for my private journal that captured her exaggerated pounding on the door and the bemused glances from passing neighbors. A clever act of boundary setting that blended satisfaction with a twinge of regret over her stranded frustration in the downpour, wondering if my humor veiled a growing isolation that even I might come to resent. With Lisa eventually retreating to her car in a spray of headlights cutting through the sheets of rain, the house settled into an uneasy quiet broken only by the storm's fading growl. But as I toweled off and prepared for bed with the waves providing a lulling counterpoint, a private message arrived from our cousin Jenny, the one mutual friend who'd navigated our family minefield with neutral grace over the years, confiding that Lisa had vented over virtual drinks about a long-simmering jealousy rooted in that very accident and how it had derailed a scholarship dream she'd secretly pinned on my shoulders ever since. The disclosure hanging in the air like an unanswered question about what other layers of motive she might peel back next to upend the fragile equilibrium I'd fought so hard to establish in this lakeside sanctuary. Jenny's late-night message about Lisa's confessed jealousy over that long-ago accident lingered in my thoughts like the stubborn fog that often blanketed the lake at dawn, casting a hazy veil over the morning as I rose to face another day in the beach house that had transformed from a symbol of quiet triumph into the epicenter of familial upheaval. The revelation from our cousin adding yet another layer to the tangled web of resentments that my birthday post had unwittingly unraveled, prompting me to wonder during my routine walk along the damp sand if Lisa's deeper grudge explained not just her explosive comment, but the subtle ways she'd influenced the family's collective amnesia around my milestones over the years, turning what I once viewed as benign oversights into calculated omissions that preserved her favored status while I navigated the role of steadfast outsider. The unease persisted through a sparse morning of freelance calls where clients praised my creative edge without suspecting the personal storm raging beneath, but by midday, the family group chat that had lain dormant for months erupted into a frenzy of overlapping texts from Mom coordinating what she termed an emergency family summit via video. Her messages laced with pleas for unity that rang false given the history of division they'd fostered, and despite the instinct to silence the notifications and retreat further into my self-imposed exile, a flicker of morbid curiosity mixed with the lingering pull of blood ties compelled me to accept the invite, positioning my laptop on the kitchen island with the window framing the restless waves as a backdrop to whatever ambush they had planned. The screen flickered to life with their faces assembled like a reluctant jury, Mom in her brightly lit Florida kitchen, surrounded by the clutter of half-eaten fruit bowls from her perpetual snack ritual. Dad slouched on the patio nursing a mug that steamed against the humid air, Tom appearing harried from his home office in Seattle with the faint sounds of his kids' cartoons bleeding through in the background, and Lisa positioned strategically in her car as if en route somewhere dramatic, her expression a calculated blend of indignation and faux vulnerability that immediately set my defenses on high alert as they launched into a synchronized narrative designed to overwhelm any resistance I might muster. Mom opened with a soft-spoken recounting of how my social media declaration had spiraled into viral territory within our broader circle of aunts, uncles, and childhood friends from the old neighborhood, stirring whispers that painted the family as dysfunctional relics unworthy of the modern independence I flaunted. But Dad quickly escalated the stakes by unveiling a bombshell about their mounting financial strains rooted in unresolved medical complications from Lisa's childhood fall, framing the expenses as a direct consequence of my impulsive actions back then that had necessitated ongoing therapies and specialists they'd quietly shouldered without burdening me during my formative years, a twist that twisted my gut because while I'd contributed sporadically to household needs post-college, they'd never disclosed the full extent of the debt. leaving me to grapple with the dilemma of whether this revelation demanded immediate aid or merely served as another lever to guilt me into submission after years of their selective support. Lisa interjected with a personal angle, admitting her resentment toward my stable career trajectory had festered since the accident allegedly cost her a coveted art scholarship she'd applied for in secret. Claiming my post exacerbated her feelings of being perpetually overshadowed by the sister who'd emerged unscathed and self-sufficient, her words punctuated by the visible trace of that forehead scar catching the dashboard light as a poignant prop. While Tom attempted mediation by proposing an in-person gathering at the beach house to mend fences, his tone conciliatory yet edged with hints of legal recourse if I persisted in excluding them from what he loosely termed shared family legacy, despite the property being my solo purchase from years of scrimped savings. The conflict crested as they collectively implied contesting aspects of the deed through old inheritance claims tied to our grandparents' estate, a growing pressure that blurred the lines between emotional blackmail and genuine hardship, evoking a whirlwind of emotions where empathy for their plight warred with outrage at the hypocrisy of demanding access now after ignoring my birthdays as if they were optional calendar entries, and in the heat of the exchange, with my voice steady but laced with rising frustration, I terminated the call by asserting that true family involved reciprocity, not retroactive entitlements, a declaration that hung in the digital air like an unanswered challenge. Channeling the surge of defiance into action, I turned to my editing software on the laptop, swiftly altering a cherished old family photo from a long-ago reunion by overlaying humorous speech bubbles filled with exaggerated excuses like Bridge Club called Birthdays Can Wait above Mom's head and Lisa's gallery opening trumps all near hers, posting the meme to my public profile with a caption teasing a mock auction of such family heirlooms to fund my ongoing solitude. The influx of amused shares and comments from followers providing a witty form of revenge that exposed their inconsistencies without delving into outright cruelty, satisfying the itch for payback even as Mom's subsequent voicemail carried a tremor of authentic hurt that made me pause and question if my cleverness was eroding the very connections worth salvaging amid this escalating turmoil. The afternoon waned into a solitary beach stroll where the incoming tide tugged at my ankles like insistent doubts, collecting fragments of shell that evoked the brittle nature of our bonds, but as twilight painted the sky in deepening hues, an anonymous email notification chimed on my phone from an unrecognized sender, its subject line promising irrefutable evidence of a profound betrayal linked to the accident's aftermath, complete with a tantalizing attachment that beckoned my cursor forward, leaving me frozen on the porch steps with the pulse of uncertainty quickening at the prospect of what hidden truth it might unleash to forever alter the course of our fractured reunion. The anonymous email's subject line burned in my mind through the restless hours of that twilight evening, its promise of irrefutable evidence regarding the accident's buried aftermath drawing me back to the laptop on the beach house desk where the screen's glow cut through the gathering darkness like a reluctant beacon, the attachment's file name, a cryptic string of dates from my childhood summers, tempting my mouse cursor forward despite the knot of apprehension twisting in my stomach, knowing that whatever secrets it held could either vindicate my long-held suspicions about the family's favoritism or shatter the fragile illusions I'd maintained to preserve some semblance of unity amid the overlooked birthdays and uneven affections that had defined our interactions for decades. With a deep breath that carried the faint tang of salt from the open window overlooking the now turbulent waves under a moonless sky, I clicked to open the documents, pages of scanned legal correspondence from a small-town attorney's office dated to the era just after the swing set incident unfolding before me in stark black-and-white clarity, detailing how Mom and Dad had negotiated a modest out-of-court settlement with the playground equipment manufacturer without ever looping in authorities or informing me as the involved child, framing the payout as hush money to shield Lisa from further scrutiny while quietly recasting my role in private family lore as the source of ongoing trouble, a revelation that confirmed the subtle clues I'd gathered over years, like that attic letter and Dad's veiled references during our recent call, transforming the forgotten birthdays from accidental slights into a deliberate pattern of passive punishment designed to keep me at arm's length without the messiness of outright confrontation. Their way of extracting atonement for a mistake I'd made at 8 years old when jealousy over her spotlight prompted that fateful push, leaving me to absorb the emotional debt through silence and self-reliance while they funneled resources and attention toward her recovery and dreams. Tears welled unbidden as the implications sank in, a potent mix of validation for my beach house declaration and profound sorrow for the young girl who'd spent a lifetime overcompensating in a household tilted irrevocably by one moment's impulsiveness. The documents hinting at additional files the sender offered if I pursued further, but in that raw vulnerability, a resolve hardened within me to orchestrate one final reckoning that blended clever retribution with the possibility of tentative healing, prompting me to compose a group message to the family laced with dry humor about hosting an unpacking session at my sanctuary where all baggage, literal and metaphorical, would be aired under strict house rules like no interruptions or recycled excuses, an invitation extended not out of weakness, but as the ultimate witty payback, transforming their potential invasion into a controlled confrontation on my terms that forced accountability without surrendering the boundaries I'd so fiercely claimed. They arrived the next evening in a convoy of rental cars crunching over the gravel, their faces etched with a cocktail of wariness and determination under the porch lights that cast long shadows across the dunes. Mom clutching a bottle of what I assumed was peace-offering wine, Dad's posture rigid with unspoken grievances, Tom hurting his reluctance like one of his sales pitches gone awry, and Lisa leading the pack with that defiant tilt to her chin, scarred forehead prominent as ever, all of them filing into the living room where I'd arranged mismatched chairs around the fireplace crackling against the evening chill, the air thick with the scent of impending rain and the weight of histories colliding as I laid out the ground rules up front, emphasizing that this gathering aimed at truth-telling minus the drama that had poisoned our past, a setup that elicited uneasy nods even as Lisa muttered something about overkill that I countered with a quip about how the beach house came with better locks than our family's communication ever had. The conversation ignited slowly at first, Mom breaking the ice with tearful admissions of how the accident had instilled a terror that led them to overprotect Lisa at my expense, channeling affections unevenly to mend what they perceived as irreparable damage, while Dad confessed the financial veil they'd drawn around the settlement stemmed from fear of judgment that rippled into everyday decisions like prioritizing her scholarships over my practical college tuition support, Tom revealing his complicity in the silence as a misguided bid to maintain harmony that only deepened the divides. But it was Lisa's turn that carried the sharpest twist, her voice cracking as she owned the jealousy that had amplified their biases, admitting she'd internalized the scar as a badge of victimhood that justified commandeering family focus and even subtly encouraging the birthday oversights to level some imagined playing field where my stability mocked her instability. The partial unveiling of the cover-up through my shared document excerpts, leaving them stunned into a collective hush that hung heavier than the storm clouds gathering outside. In the charged aftermath, with emotions swirling like the wind whipping the waves audible through the walls, I delivered my satisfying climax of revenge by distributing small engraved keychains for the guest rooms, each tag boldly inscribed with boundaries enforced. No guilt trips allowed, alongside a light-hearted caveat that violations meant immediate revocation, a gesture that drew reluctant chuckles amid the sniffles and prompted hugs that felt tentative yet genuine, watching as they grappled with the new paradigm where my independence set the tone rather than their expectations, the evening winding down with shared stories around the fire that peeled back layers, without fully resolving the undercurrents of hurt. Yet, as they dispersed to their assigned spaces for the night, the anonymous sender's follow-up note arriving on my phone with offers of more explosive files that could expose the settlement's finer deceptions. I slipped out to the deck alone where the tides crashed relentlessly below, pondering in the salty spray weather to dive deeper into the revelations and risk irreparable fracture, or allow this ambiguous truce to stand as a fragile bridge, leaving me adrift with the haunting question of if My empowered solitude truly mended the wounds or merely isolated me further in a legacy of half-truths that the family might one day revisit or abandon forever, the waves offering no clear answer as the night deepened into uncertainty.